Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the CEDH cast. My name is Ian, and I am by myself this week because I am breaking down my Kroxa Turbo Ad Nauseam deck list, also known as Noxa. Now, before I go down into any details of this deck, I want to give a shout out to our patron of the week. Our patron of the week this week is Noah. Noah has been a listener for a long time and someone who's pretty active in the community, a great person we like to have around. And in addition, Noah is one of the mods on our YouTube streams. So every time I do that, he helps out with, just making sure everything runs smoothly. So appreciate it, Noah, and thank you for all the support on the podcast. As everyone knows, we have a lot of exciting stuff going on right now, including our promotions with the Mythic Society, which you can find out more by either watching Braden's info video on that or checking out our Greedy Keeps, in which you can check out those Google Docs and sign up for a chance to win $25. Now, for those who are unaware, the Mythic Society is a group put on by some former Magic pros, and it is a Magic store that is also running leagues based out of their Twitch. So you just have to be a subscriber to their Twitch channel, and then you can actually win store credit at their store, and they have like a huge selection of CEDH staples, so it's pretty nice, and I'm very excited to be participating in those leagues, and it's every Tuesday from 1 p.m. EST to 10 p.m. EST, so you all should go check that out. All right, let's break down the decks today. So for those of you who have been following the podcast for a very long time, they know I have always been a Kroxa fan since its printing. But I was having a lot of trouble with Kroxa in the early days just because the early World Gorger hands would be like absolutely amazing. They'd be like a crazy blowout and they'd be really fun. But when the deck tried to be grindier or slower, it would often do its thing and it would grind the game pretty hard, but it would have trouble basically finishing before whatever time limit there was. I would be in control of the board. I would often win with something as simple as like attacking with Kroxa over and over again. But unfortunately, because of the way that CEDH works, like a lot of structured tournaments have time limits, and getting in under the 90-minute time limit wasn't really working. And especially since the format has sped up with the advent of Turbo Dockside and Turbo Adnaz, that version of the deck couldn't really keep up with the strategies that were available in CEDH at the time, since Flash has been banned. So ever since Peer into the Abyss was printed, I thought it would be an amazing fit in a Kroxa deck, and then I did a lot of looking at my old lists and all the cards that I really enjoyed, and a lot of them just happened to work with a Turbo Ad Nauseam shell, so I decided, hey, let's go take it from that angle. Now, for those of you just listening to the audio version of the podcast, I'm going to be on YouTube displaying all the cards we're talking about. I actually have a video up of the deck list, and I will be going over the card images and talking about specific choices. So if you want to know more about the specific cards that I'm going to be talking about today, you should definitely go check out the YouTube version of this episode. So let's break down some of the things in the deck. So maybe one of the first things you'll probably notice is that I'm playing all of the 0-drop creatures, or not all of them, I guess, but a number of 0-drop creatures. There's a dual purpose for this. The first is that, one, they turn on Mox Opal, which is pretty valuable when you're nosing off. Being able to play like a Memnite and a Phyrexian Walker and then have your Mox Opal be turned on after you nose without having to invest any mana into the board is actually pretty big. So that's obviously Mox Opal is like a great piece, and especially when it is just a free piece of mana. With this deck in particular, you don't have the most amount of free mana for after you nose, so it's definitely nice to be able to utilize the pieces that we do have to their maximum capabilities. And Mox Opal ended up being really important in the early days of testing the deck. One other note in the sort of smaller creatures in the deck is a card called Stitcher's Supplier. So you'll see it up on your screen now. It is a 1-mana 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield or dies, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. So not only is this a great card to potentially bin a World Gorger Dragon, and I'll go over the win conditions of the deck in a minute, But Stitcher Supplier also is a combo if you have Underworld Breach and classic classic Ad Nauseam card, Culling the Weak. So what happens is you, for 1 mana, play the Stitcher Supplier. It will mill 3, which will then allow you to have enough graveyard fuel to cast Culling the Weak, which will make you 4 black mana. And when you sack the Stitcher Supplier, it will actually put 3 more cards into your graveyard. So the way this loop ends up working out is you'll end up exiling 6 cards of your graveyard, and you'll end up making 2 black mana. So when you're breaching off, it's really good because you can actually just keep milling your library until you put a World Gorger into your graveyard and hopefully an Animate Dead effect. And this is actually like basically a 3-card way to assemble the breach combos and assemble the World Gorger Dragon combos. So let's talk about this deck. The main purpose of the deck is to play a lot of cards that you would consider lower card quality, but very explosive. So things like Dark Ritual, things like, let's see here, I have Infernal Plunge, I have Culling the Weak, these Reign of Filth, all these cards that make a ton of mana when you are either nosing or have a bunch of cards in your hand. And then from there, it is the game plan is to resolve a very early Ad Nauseam, or a Peer into the Abyss, which will draw you obviously a significant portion of your deck. After that point, there are a few win conditions in the deck. The most classic, obviously, is the World Gorger Dragon plus an Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, or a Necromancy, which will basically create a loop where you make infinite mana, and then you'll be able to play our commander, Kroxa, out of your command zone and shred your opponent's hands, and then when they are hellbent, it will start doing 3 damage to them every time you cast Kroxa, and with infinite mana, you will just deal 3 damage until your opponents are dead. So that's the easiest win condition to assemble in the deck, and you don't even need to actually nose off for that win condition to happen. It is just definitely one of the easiest ways to assemble it. The other hard win condition is with Dualcaster Mage and combining that with either Heat Shimmer or Twin Flame. And normally you see these cards and you would expect them to be sort of dead cards, but they aren't in this deck. And it's because of a couple cards here. Stitcher Supplier is a fine value one that we talked about earlier, but the main one is for Dockside Extortionist, because if you can, when you're storming off, basically, if you can play a Twin Flame or a Heat Shimmer, you can actually just start making tons of treasures with your Dockside. Heat Shimmer in particular is actually really valuable because it says any creature. It's not limited to your own creatures. So Heat Shimmer, I've actually had this come up in a couple games where my opponents had a Dockside and I didn't. So I was actually able to Heat Shimmer a copy of my opponent's Dockside, which was pretty awesome. But the way Heat Shimmer and Twin Flame work with Dualcaster Mage is if you target another creature, either one of ours with Twin Flame or potentially one of your opponents with Heat Shimmer, you can then cast Dualcaster Mage, and what that does is create an infinite amount of copies of Dualcaster Mage with haste, which will then obviously kill your opponents on combat. So those are the 2 hard combos in the deck. The rest of the combos are basically Underworld Breach combos, and those are used to more or less assemble the combos I've just mentioned. However, there are certain ways that you can accrue a ton of value with Breach and net a ton of mana, for example, like with the Culling the Weak combo I was talking about earlier, and then you can Praetor's Grasp your opponent and usually pull a win condition out of there. If they have the other half of a Dockside combo, you can grab that. If they have Thassa's Oracle, we are playing Tainted Pact, so that's a pretty easy way to steal a win. A number of cards like that. So, obviously knowing your opponent's decks is pretty important, because being able to Praetor's Grasp them efficiently is definitely a way you can take a game. So that's the main win conditions in the deck. That's how we sort of get to the point where that's the end goal of when we're casting Ad Nauseam, when we're casting Peer into the Abyss. That's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to get to a point where I can assemble one of those win conditions. Now we get to talk about some more of the cute stuff in the deck, or basically the pieces that put it together. So there's 14 creatures in the deck, which you may notice is like a reasonable amount for a deck of this type. The thing is, I actually even might want to add more as time goes on, just because when you are casting Nas, when you're casting Culling the Weak, I'm playing Diabolic Intent, Infernal Plunge, Culling the Weak, all of these cards that sacrifice your own creatures and accrue value for you. In the land spot, I'm actually playing Phyrexian Tower as well, which is the land that allows you to sack a creature to add 2 black mana, which has been a really key card in the deck. It's actually been able to add a lot of value. But when you play these cards that sacrifice creatures to give you like an exorbitant amount of value, you do need to have a certain density of them. So, and as I said, because our commander isn't a creature that stays on the board for some of the sorcery speed sacrifice effects, it's definitely, I could add a few more, but finding ones to add that don't dilute the card quality too much, like it's already a reasonable amount that we're playing the 0 mana creatures. They are really good at what they do. Like they're perfect for what they do in the deck. However, if I'm going to add more creatures to the deck, I really want to keep it to a point where I am adding creatures that will actually have an impact, because three basically useless creatures is pretty much enough. And then we can talk about Mayhem Devil. Mayhem Devil is a very interesting card in this current meta. I like it quite a lot. It is not only a combo with our Dockside, where you can sacrifice the treasures, have the Mayhem Devil target our own Dockside, and then use reanimation effects or Underworld Breach to get the Dockside back again, which is like pretty good. There's some soft loops there. But Mayhem Devil is also a hate piece for your opponent's Docksides. I've been in many games where, an opponent plays a Dockside for like 6 or something. One of their opponents resolves a Mayhem Devil, and they basically get their entire board mowed down. Or it happens to a different opponent where the Mayhem Devil player and the Dockside player end up working together to take out important pieces, and creature-based combos happen to fall apart. I know, for example, when I play Dawnwaker, a Mayhem Devil stops my Dockside combos pretty hard because they just end up killing one of my combo pieces in response. So that's pretty cool. You definitely are going to see some more unique cards in this build. I am playing cards like Vicious Rumors and Burglar Rat, which is actually an all-star in this deck. It's just a 1/1 for 2 mana that enters the battlefield and makes each opponent discard a card. You're going to see in a second, this deck has basically a plan B of going Discard Storm, which is actually really... It's one of my favorite parts about this deck, is being able to storm off with a card like either Geth's Grimoire or the classic Waste Knot. So if you play those effects, then play Kroxa or play Burglar Rat, it allows you to draw a ton of cards with Waste Knot. The other day, instead of going for a Nas, I just Waste Knotted into a Wheel of Fortune and was able to basically take the game from there. It ends up being pretty insane. With those effects, Chains is also really good, because Chains makes it so your opponent, anytime they would try to draw an extra card, they're going to discard it instead, and that will trigger your Grimoire or your Waste Knot. Chains is definitely a little awkward with Peer into the Abyss, and I have thought about maybe cutting it for that reason, but I'm keeping it in now because of how much synergy it does have with Geth's Grimoire and Waste Knot. So that's why you see a lot of these discard effects in the deck. 1, because obviously your opponent's not having hands is really good for you, and then 2, because they actually end up being storm enablers, which is pretty insane. Some really interesting cards in the deck so far. I mean, you can see a lot of the smaller rituals with like Rite of Flame, things like that. Overmaster is a card that I'm a big fan of. For 1 red, it's a sorcery, and it says the next instant and sorcery spell you play this turn can't be countered by spells or abilities, and then you draw a card. So that's like insane with Ad Nauseam. It's insane with Peer into the Abyss. It's great with tutors. It just... And also with Wheel of Fortune, if you need that to go through for a discard effect. Overmaster's actually been like really key. And then worst case scenario, it just like cycles. And that's fine. That's fine. It's been a really fun card, and sometimes people, they just don't know how to handle that card, which is pretty cool. Some other things I want to talk about. Shred Memory. Shred Memory is an interesting card, and I think transmute spells... they're definitely not, I would say, really underplayed, but they definitely could be played more. Shred Memory is really good because it allows you to transmute for 1 and 2 black to get a 2-drop out of your deck. So there's a number of key 2-drops like Waste Not, there's Chains, there's Underworld Breach, there's a number of cards that are very good 2-drops. Dockside, obviously, is a huge one. And this being a Dockside format, being able to 2-drop a Dockside at any time is very interesting. And then the face version, which says you can remove up to 4 cards in a single graveyard from the game, that does come in every once in a while because, this is a breach-heavy format. So being able to take advantage of that and snipe cards out of your opponent's deck is really, really interesting. Let's talk about the deck as a whole. The deck is very interesting. It's really fun to play. I will say that, but especially when you're doing things like that are not traditionally competitive strategies, like storming off with discard spells is like really fun. The fact that your commander allows you to just like draw a bunch of cards when you cast it sometimes is pretty insane. Being able to convert Kroxa's ability into card draw is actually pretty great for the deck because innately Kroxa doesn't get you card advantage. It creates disadvantage for your opponents by removing cards from their hands, and especially when you can escape it out of the graveyard, it will do that. But Kroxa definitely does not get you the cards that you need. So I do have to mulligan pretty aggressively with this deck. And I know you guys hear Braden and I talk about aggressive mulligans a good amount, but I'm looking for key things when I mulligan in this deck. I'm looking for early acceleration, but more importantly, I'm looking for tutors. Tutors are basically the thing that keeps this deck together. You need to be able to slap your pieces together in the right order. And the deck relies on the fact that right now I think people are playing pretty greedy in the current meta. They are taking turns off by tapping out for certain pieces, or they're also trying to play like a pretty aggro Nas deck. So by the time it gets to you, if you've had like a turn or two to set up your engine, you usually can just take the game because somebody's been, basically tapping out for a crazy effect. The good part about the discard engines is that it takes a bit of that away. So if people are playing greedy, you are now stripping combo pieces out of their hand, meaning that their combos are falling apart. And if people are playing reactionary, if people are playing the more controlling roles, you are just taking away their engine pieces and their value pieces and their interaction for when you try and go off. So that's pretty key. I really enjoy that about this deck. It's been really fun. It's definitely a Turbo Nas deck. It's definitely a very aggressive push, and you are definitely trying to do your thing as fast as possible. The games I've found the most success have definitely been where you can try something early, and then by the next time you try it, it usually works. And that usually comes in the form of, maybe not going right for an ad nauseum on turn 2, but instead, trying to do some shenanigans with Waste Not, something like that, and then letting your opponents think you're not doing anything, and then just untapping and like playing a pier, which is pretty awesome. Playing the small card advantage engines in the beginning really help you get to that middle game. I would say it's more of a mid-game ad nauseum deck than most traditional ad nause decks. I often nause or pier on turn like 3 or 4, which is obviously still very good, but it definitely has more of a grind game. One thing I will say about this version that the old Kroxa deck did not have, and that I like about this version a lot, is that with traditional Kroxa decks, there was a lot of enchantments, there was a lot of contradiction with the fact that you want a bunch of cards in your graveyard, but you want to be playing a lot of these haymaker enchantments that like strip your opponent's hands and you take removal out of them and a lot of stuff like that. A lot of cards like that don't put a lot of cards in the graveyard. Whereas this version, I was playing the other day and I was like, oh yeah, right, like I'm in a little bit of a desperate spot because I had like 8 things of mine countered. And I was like, oh yeah, I can actually just play Kroxa this turn and then play it out of my graveyard because I had like 60 cards in my graveyard, or like 30 more realistically. And that's just one thing that like this deck really is able to use Kroxa to the fullest. I think it there are some games where you will not see it until you have cast a World Gorger Dragon and you're killing everybody, or there are some games where it literally is a card advantage engine because you have Geth's Grimoire or Waste Not on the battlefield. One cool thing about this deck also is that the animate dead effects, the things that normally in a Kroxa deck would not really do a lot unless they were going for the win condition, they're really good with a lot of the storming off things. So, for example, like trying to cast Dockside multiple times, if you sack it to a mana ritual and then animate dead it back on the battlefield. You know, a lot of the stuff that Braden was talking about way back in the day with his Korvold Faux Farm deck. And by way back in the day, I mean like a month ago. Yeah, and that's sort of the idea of this deck, is that it's a really fun value engine deck, and it really does create a unique space because Kroxa is playing the game very differently than a lot of the other Turbo Nas decks. This deck definitely seeks to attack your opponent's resources first and then Nas off, or even set up a Nas that they aren't accounting for. A lot of the time, I find that this deck doesn't put a lot of, I would say, menacing permanence on the board, and that's really good for you. So, for example, I was playing a game the other day where I just played a turn 1 Burglar Rat because I played a Mox into a Burglar Rat. My opponents discarded, and they were kind of humming and hawing about that, but that was like it. That's all they had as their reaction. And the next turn I played a Dark Confidant, and they were like, yeah, sure. Or maybe the order was reversed on that. But that's just fine, right? These are just cards, and people aren't really like looking at the Kroxa deck as like, oh, this deck's very scary, it's about to go off. But then the turn after that, I played a Phyrexian Tower, I played a Cabal Culling the Weak, and then suddenly I had like 7 mana, and I was able to cast a Nas with mana up for when I finally resolved it, and able to take the win that same turn. So it's very good at looking like it's not doing anything until it is very much doing something. So that's really good. When people catch on to what the deck is doing, I will say, because you are lower on creatures than the average deck, they will swing at you. Luckily, there's enough Turbo Nas in the format where they're swinging at a lot of players. And so that's definitely spread out a little bit. But if you are the one Nas deck in your table, you're definitely going to need to do your thing a little quicker. But luckily, that's where Peer comes in, because Peer doesn't really care where your life total's at. And that's about it. It's a really, really fun deck. It has a lot of interlayering synergies where, you know, some cards, for example, think of Unearth, right? That is a card that mostly works with our commander because you can cast Kroxa and then for 1 black mana, pull it out of the graveyard and take another card out of each of your opponent's hands. But also, after you've cast Ad Nauseam, suddenly that is a card that basically allows you to sack a Dockside and then bring that back to the battlefield, or sack a Burglar Rat, which will, you know, bring that back and then have your opponent's hands get shredded if you have something like a Waste Not or a Geth's Grimoire. There's a lot of really interesting layering. The stuff I talked about with the Twin Flame and Heat Shimmer, where those cards are usually just strange combo pieces, but now there are also cards that double your Docksides or double your discard effects. So there's a lot of really fun layering, and it's been a blast to play. And that's about it. It's a really fun deck. It's exciting. It's pretty powerful. It's definitely not the best Turbo Nas deck out there. Obviously, there are going to be decks that probably do this better, but this definitely plays on a unique axis, and it's going to get wins. It's a deck that wins the game. It's a deck that has a really unique and interesting game plan, and it's a deck that utilizes this commander to its fullest extent. And I think if you are interested in Kroxa as a commander, it's by far the best Kroxa shell. I've really enjoyed this as someone who likes this commander. You know, the old versions of the deck were slow, they were grindy, and they just never ended up taking the victory when you needed to, and they never ended up just stealing the game when you had it. And this version does not have that problem. If someone gives you the opportunity with this deck, you take it and you win. There's no lollygagging. There's no, oh, well, I have to play a Chains now, and then I'm playing a Oppression, and then no one has a hand, but I can't take advantage of it, or I can't cast Kroxa out of my graveyard. None of those problems with the old version of the deck are here. And I think this is my favorite way I've seen this deck built and I think it has a lot of potential, and can't stress enough, it's just fun. It is a fun deck to play, and it creates a really fun game. So I hope you guys enjoyed this deck tech. Now, if you see any of these pieces and you really like this deck, or if you feel the compulsive need to purchase a Chains of Mephistopheles, which is a card that's printed once and is it's quite powerful for what it does. But if you find the need to fill up your cart with Chains of Mephistopheles, please check out the TCG player link that will be below in the show notes wherever you are listening to this, and it helps out the channel more than you could know. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the CEDH cast. I really hope you guys enjoyed the deck today, and it's been super fun to play. And I really hope people give the deck a shot, because it's a blast and it's pretty strong, and it gets to utilize one of my favorite commanders. So thanks, everybody. I hope you guys have an amazing week. Bye.